You wanted the best. You've got the best podcast. The hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show. The preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
I'm Chris Voss here from thechrisvossshow.com. Yes, you know it's officially thechrisvossshow.com because we hired an opera singer last week to do that part of the show that I've been doing for 15 years, and I'm just kind of tired of doing it, and I think she does it much better. Write me and let me know what you guys think. Maybe you'll miss the horrible sounding voice that I have. Maybe you don't. Maybe you just think it's funny, and you'll find at the end of every show too, we tag it on the end there. I don't know, maybe we'll invite the opera singer to do more parts of the show. Maybe we should invite guests to come on, and they have to sing in operatic format as I do in asking the questions, and it's just like a giant opera. Or maybe it'll be like a ballet. Anyway, guys, well, thanks for coming by the show. The Chris Voss Show family. The family loves you but doesn't judge you, at least not as harshly as your mother-in-law. As always, help us out on the show. We beg you, we plead you, we guilt you, we shame you. Go to iTunes, give us a 5-star review. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, LinkedIn.com/Chris Voss, YouTube.com/Chris Voss, and Chris Voss1 on TikTok. For 15 years, we bring you the billionest people on the planet, the billionaires, the CEOs, the Pulitzer Prize winners, the astronauts, the people who do White House advisories. And always, you're going to learn great stories, great lessons in life, and expand your mind. And you're going to get what they call the Chris Voss glow. Not everyone can have a Chris Voss glow. It's a special glow. And those who listen are the only ones who can experience the glow. Tom Fox is a compliance evangelist, and he joins us today on the show. He's going to be talking to us about compliance, business, regulatory stuff, all that sort of thing you need to know to keep yourself out of trouble, because you don't want to get into the trouble. We've all seen that movie. Thomas R. Fox is the compliance evangelist. He is literally the guy who wrote the book on compliance with the international compliance bestseller, The Compliance Handbook, 3rd edition, which was released by LexisNexis in May 2022. He's authored 25 other books on business leadership, compliance and ethics, and corporate governance, including the international bestsellers Lessons Learned from Compliance and Ethics and Best Practices under the FCPA and Bribery Act, as well as his award-winning series Fox on Compliance. He leads the social media discussion on compliance with his award-winning blog and his Voice of Compliance, having founded the award-winning Compliance Podcast Network and hosting or producing multiple award-winning podcasts. He's an executive leader at the C-Suite Network and the world's most trusted network of C-Suite leaders. And he joins us on the show now to make sure that we're in compliance. Welcome to the show. Tom, how are you?
Great, Chris. Thrilled to be here with you today.
Thrilled to have you as well. Give us your .coms. Where do you want people to find you on the interwebs and stalk you?
The Compliance Podcast Network.net. I'm on LinkedIn at Thomas R. Fox. And I have a second podcast network, the Texas Hill Country Podcast Network.com.
Where do you get time for all these podcasts, Tom? Tom, for all these podcasts?
I work 12 to 15 hours a day, 6 days a week.
Holy crap. And I thought I was doing a lot of 4 shows a day. That's pretty freaking amazing. And how many podcasts do you have on the Compliance Podcast Network?
So there's 65 total, 50 of which are mine.
Wow. That is a lot of work going on. I'm tired already. I might have to go take a nap. So, Tom, give us a 30,000 overview in your words of everything you do and how you do it. I mean, not exactly, down to detail of how you do it, just a summary, if you would.
So from the compliance angle, I've been in this space. I'm a lawyer by professional training for about 15 years. I've been a chief compliance officer. I've been a general counsel. In 2010, I went out on my own, and I wanted to be the nuts and bolts guy to help companies build compliance programs. I started blogging. That led to podcasting, and it led to finding a compliance podcast network. It blew up during the pandemic, and since that time, I've been pretty much full-time podcasting.
There you go. Now you have a whole array of what looks like, I think, coffee mugs on the shelves behind you. Is that correct?
That's correct. Every time I start a new podcast, I commemorate it with a coffee mug.
Ah, so these are all your coffee mugs. There you go. So interesting. You may need to buy some more walls and shelf space there, the way you're going, if you keep it up at this pace. So tell us about what your journey is. How did you become a lawyer? How did you get into compliance? And let's also set a foundation for what we mean by compliance. What does compliance mean exactly in the terms of business that you use it for?
Compliance is generally recognized as legal or regulatory compliance with a law or set of regulations. I started off in anti-bribery, anti-corruption. There's one U.S. law that prevents U.S. companies from engaging in bribery outside the United States called the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. So I
Hmm.
started off helping companies put compliance programs in place to comply with that law. That expanded out into anti-money laundering and export control and trade sanctions, but I'm primarily known as an anti-corruption specialist.
Ah, anti-corruption. So do you work with Fortune 500 companies, or just everybody down and in between? Does everybody need to be worried about being in compliance these days?
Anyone who does business internationally has to comply
Ah,
with this law. So if you're a $50 million or $10 million company, but you sell something overseas, you have to comply with the law. If you're Walmart, the world's largest commercial retailer, you have to comply with this law. So it's a wide variety of companies, generally those doing business outside the United States as well as inside the US.
so compliance with federal laws, regulations, trade, I suppose, the FTC, things along those lines.
And the Department of Justice.
Ah, the Department of Justice. We've had some people from them on, and they used to, and attorneys that were and stuff like that. So yeah, we've met those people, and they're pretty cool. We just had some FBI people on, things like that. Tell us your journey. What made you interested in compliance? What got you interested in becoming an attorney and kind of specializing in this field?
So I became an attorney very long time ago. I went to law school, came out. I was a trial lawyer for 25 years. So I'm a recovering trial lawyer. I left that, went into the in-house world, and started off with a large energy company in Houston, where I lived for 40 years. Then I became a general counsel at another energy company. They violated that law I referenced, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. At
Oh,
that point, I learned about compliance. So this was 2007.
hmm.
Company got sold, and my job went away. So I was at that point 50, and I decided what I really wanted to do with my life was race bicycles. So I went on this great adventure of bicycle racing, 20 and 40 Ks, until one Saturday after Thanksgiving in 2009, I got taken out by a Hummer on a
Oh
training ride.
no.
That ended my cycling career. And when I got enough energy to get on my walker and toddle into my office at home after a few months of rehabilitation,
Hmm.
I decided I really enjoyed building compliance programs inside corporations. So
Yeah.
I decided to be the nuts and bolts guy. And at that point, I knew nothing about social media. So I had my daughter set up a Facebook account, LinkedIn account, started with Twitter. Uh, I had no work, I had no clients, and the only thing I had on my hands was time. So I started exploring social media, started blogging. Always written a lot as a lawyer. So that led to um, developing clients internationally, literally out of my house, way before work from home. And I couldn't leave the house. I couldn't go to a meeting. I couldn't go have a dinner. I couldn't go to a conference. So I learned how to do all of that literally out of your house. And
Yeah.
that's how it all started. And I grew from there.
There you
And I
go.
got,
Yeah.
then I started,
Was there more?
yeah, the podcasting just naturally came out of blogging. I started podcasting in 2012.
There you go. It's an interesting business. It's a lot of fun, and a lot of people came out of COVID realigning their interests and finding what their flavor is and stuff like that. Now you've recruited a whole mess of people to your podcast network. How does that work?
So I founded the network in 2017. In 2019, I decided I had to either get serious about it or move it to hobby status. So I quit practicing law, quit practicing compliance, bought all the cool toys, built this huge network. And at the end of the year, I'd made about $10,000. And I thought,
Wow.
well, that was an interesting experiment. Guess I have to go back to practicing law. So I started doing that again in 2019 or 2020. And then that worked till they shut the country down in March. And then what happened was literally on May 15th of that year, every product provider in my space called me with the same question, which was, how long to get access to your network? Because almost all marketing in the compliance world was done in person, trade shows, conferences, breakfast roundtables, in-person events, et cetera. And
Mhm.
no one could do that. And by that time, I had the largest social media presence in compliance. And because of the work I'd done in 2019, where I made all of that $10,000, my answer was 24 hours. It was just simply a plug and play. Give me your stuff, I'll put it up.
Mhm.
And that my little world blew up. Um, and since that time, I've focused almost exclusively on podcasting, trying to consolidate the explosion of growth I had in 2020 and see where I can take my network.
All right. So you talk about compliance as a business generator. What does that mean? And evidently, compliance can help make your business more efficient and more profitable. So if I'm a owner of a company out there, and I really haven't delved much into compliance, tell me how this whole thing becomes a better business generator and more efficient, more profitable, please.
Sure. Unfortunately, compliance is seen as generally Dr. No inhabiting the land of no, the
Mm,
business of, or the department of non business. That view is incorrect, in my opinion. Properly seen, compliance is a business process. And if it's a business process, it can be managed, it can be studied, it can be monitored, and it can be improved. So I advocate that effective compliance equates to more efficient business processes. That leads to greater ROI and greater profitability.
mhm,
The controls every company has in place, literally every company, are financial controls largely. How do you manage your money? How do you manage your income? How do you manage your outgo? How do you manage every expense? Well, compliance is basically financial controls. And if you put robust financial controls in place, you're always going to have a better run company. And that means you're going to be more efficient. Compliance is not there, or the best analogy I can give you is you don't have brakes on a car to go slow. You have brakes on a car so you can go fast. Well, the same with compliance. Compliance allows you to take on more risk because it manages that risk. And if you manage the risk, you can pivot, you can turn, you can accelerate in ways your uh, competitors cannot do so.
there you go. So in looking over some of the things, it looks like most of the podcasts that are on your network are compliance based.
Well, they're compliance related, but I
Okay.
have one switch that's on and off. If I
Mhm.
have an idea, I start a new podcast. I don't have a dimmer switch. I don't have a regulator or moderator. So you can slice and dice compliance in any way you can think. So Star Trek in
Wow.
compliance, sports in compliance, Star Wars in compliance, the MCU in compliance, great women in compliance, roundtables in compliance, compliance into the weeds, daily compliance, weekly compliance, nuts and bolts compliance, 31 days to a better compliance program. Those are some of the shows that I have. And
Sounds like my first 5 marriages. Lots of compliance. Wash the dishes before you put them in the dishwasher, that sort of thing. Just a joke there, people. So you talk about culture, and when you talk about culture, do you mean like compliance culture or just culture in a business?
culture in a business, the values in a business. The Department of Justice, about 2 years ago, finally started saying, guys, it's really about culture. Yes, having a compliance program is important, but it's
Mhm.
about your corporate culture. And that means, what are your values? If you talk a good talk and walk a good walk, that's going to go a long way towards making sure you don't violate, or your employees don't violate the law. So it all starts with the tone at the top, but culture is about the values. What are the values of your organization?
Mm. You mean we're supposed to have values and ethics and shit now? Is that like
Well,
a thing?
you were supposed to always have those.
What? What? Note to self: get ethics and values. Delegate that to Joe or Bob. It's always Bob. So this is important. Otherwise, you end up with, I guess, like Enron or FTX or some of these other companies that are so
I mean,
serious
you name
problems. So,
the company, Volkswagen, Theranos,
oh yeah,
Enron, WorldCom,
yeah.
you name it, they've gone through it.
There you go. And it's pretty ugly PR wise when you muck it up, right?
It's very ugly PR wise. And the thing about PR wise and the reputational damages, if you violate a law like the FCPA, you may pay a fine and penalty.
Hmm.
Companies can deal with fines and penalties because once they know the cost, they can reserve for that cost. They can
Oh,
say, whatever they have to do. But if you have reputational damage, you lose money off the top line, meaning your customers won't buy from you. Other businesses won't do business with you. And that's business you'll never get back. Now you can, pick those customers back up, but for that period of time, that's directly off your top line. You'll never get that
wow,
money back.
wow. Yeah, it makes all the difference in the world. The trustable nature of your business, and then of course your employees being able to trust you, being able to trust culture. It's a huge thing, and being able to lay a good foundation of culture and everything else. Um, what was the Texas Hill Country Podcast Network? I'm not sure where that question is there, but I'll ask it anyway.
Sure. So I moved to the Texas Hill Country, part of West Texas, which is just that hills, which is very unusual for the state of Texas, about a couple of years ago.
Hmm.
And I decided to start a local podcast where I featured people who lived in the Hill Country and then some other businessmen who had started a financial services podcast because their financial advisors approached me and said, "Hey, would you be interested in starting a network?" And I
Hmm.
was, because I wanted to see if there was a viable economic model for a rural podcast. So I live in a town with no TV, no radio, newspaper 3 days a week. The radio's internet, not local. So no local news.
Hmm.
And I wanted to see, could we bring a local flavor, but more importantly, could we provide a platform for local businesses to advertise on social media locally? And could we help drive their sales? So that's what we're trying to do. We have 15 shows. We have 3,000 subscribers. We have shows about business valuation company, a fellow who helps treat diabetes through exercise, a couple of consultants, and we're trying to show that it's viable in a local market. Typically, a rural or a small podcast network has a big anchor show, and everybody else just feeds off of it. I didn't want to
Hmm.
do that. I wanted to see, can we have social media marketing for local businesses? And we've been pretty successful at it so far. We've been at it a year, and we've won 2 podcast awards already. So just having fun.
There you go. I don't know where this comes out of left field. Yeah, thanks, Adam. I guess the Chris Voss Show, the best thing since peanut butter and jelly. I don't know. Isn't that an insult to peanut butter and jelly? I don't know.
I hope not.
Um, is, are we gonna have peanut butter and jelly sponsors? I don't even know where. You gotta love our audience; they're awesome. Uh, Now, one of the things you talk about is how business has changed forever after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the Ukraine. How does that? How does that work out? Is that different when I have to reanalyze how I do business now?
No, probably not. But for international businesses, it definitely changed.
Hmm.
And I picked that date because it seemed to me to bookend the changes that started during the pandemic. So obviously, we saw supply chains dry up. We saw regions of the world you couldn't get your products from, or you couldn't ship your products to because of
Yeah,
COVID-19. Well, the
supply
Russian
chain.
invasion of Ukraine cut off the United States from Russia and vice versa. So you
Hmm.
couldn't do business in Russia. You couldn't sell into Russia, and you couldn't get materials and raw goods out of Russia, whether it be energy products, minerals, anything. And the sanctions increased greatly. So sanctions became much more prevalent. Companies now had to elevate their trade sanction compliance programs as high as other programs, and they had to be much more sensitive to what started during COVID-19, which was the shift in geopolitical risk to things like supply chain, to things like money laundering, to things like export and trade control, and even ESG. You mentioned reputational risk. Well, if you're still doing business in Russia and somebody announces that to the world, there's going to be a backlash.
Note to self, stop doing business in Russia and stop the international arms trading. Okay, I just want to make sure I got that down. I'll pass that to Bob, see if Bob can work on that. I imagine, with international, monetary funds and banks that are locking down money, there's a whole list of Russians that you can't do business with. Note to self, stop doing business with Russian oligarchs and hanging out on their yachts, eh? So there's that.
But see, you can take the flip side of that, because I believe that after the war ends, and it will end at some point, the rebuilding of Ukraine will be the largest construction project literally since the end of World War II. More international money will pour into Ukraine to rebuild it. Ukraine has a terrible reputation for corruption, and all of these agencies that are going to put money in, the World Bank, the United Nations, the IMF, the United States, Western Europe, they're going to demand rigorous compliance controls. So there's going to be a great opportunity for literally U.S. bricklayers to do business in Ukraine, but they're going to have a compliance program in place.
I'm going to go there and start a podcast, the Ukraine Rebuilding Podcast. The women over there are beautiful. They're some of the most beautiful women in the world. In fact, they used to have a huge adoption surrogate business over there because the women are so beautiful and stuff. And that all got interrupted with the Russian thing. But yeah, hopefully that would end soon. It looks like Russia's playing the long game, where they're going to see who's going to become president in 2024 and do their gamble. So, they're just going to do like they did in Syria and just stall for time. They seem to be at a point where I don't know why the Ukrainians are pushing. They should just call it a detente and hold on to it. But I don't know. It's not my country. None of my business, I guess. They can do what they want. They're fighting for their liberty, and I can't blame them. God bless them. So you talk about what businesses need to do to prepare for a coming conflict with China. We've certainly seen the sword rattling they've been doing, the different things that their leaders have been doing. They've almost become less capitalistic, or slanted towards capitalism, and some of the freedoms they used to have. And it seems like they're just kind of going back to the old Chinese socialist, communist sort of style party. What do you see happening with a potential conflict with China?
So everything I said about Russia, take that about 10 paces further, or maybe even 10x further. China is the largest consumer market in the world. What are you going to do if the conflict raises to the point where China will no longer accept U.S. imports? What if your largest customer is in China? How are you going to replace that customer? I was rather stunned to find the U.S. lumber industry's number one customer is China. Well, that could be a real loss to our U.S. lumber industry. So how do you start thinking about who's going to buy your products? Well, if it's a U.S. lumber industry, and I live in a place, even my little town has a housing crisis.
Yeah.
Why don't we repatriate all that lumber to the United States and build a new set of houses for people who are coming into the workforce now? Give them affordable houses that they can buy the first house that our parents bought, that maybe we bought, that are relatively cheap, that you can afford to buy. Things like that. How are you going to get raw materials out of China? The same thing, silicon chips or anything like that. And then China has right now is using slave labor in the Uyghur region of Xinjiang region with Uyghurs, oppressed ethnic minority. There's a U.S. law that prevents you from buying any goods in that region unless you show it didn't come from forced labor. So you have to worry about the forced labor. But it's worse because U.S. Businesses have been raided in China. U.S. business executives have been arrested in China. If someone asked me to go to China right now, I'd say, no, thank you. I'm happy to stay right here and do it virtually.
The internet sucks over there, so that's another.
Yeah, and so there's a whole set of problems that U.S. companies when I say problems, I mean risks. How do you manage these risks? What's going to happen if there's a shooting war with Taiwan? How bad is that going to be? What happens if they sink a U.S. aircraft carrier? That's 5,000 men and women. what's the reaction of the U.S. public going to be? Hopefully, cooler heads will prevail, and hard-nosed competition is something that certainly the United States can live with. But if it moves to a shooting war, that's a whole different level.
It most definitely. The interesting thing about them is how economically we're tied together with our markets. And so you would think that it would be hard for us to go to war with each other, in spite of all the saber rattling. But when you look at what's going on, where they want Taiwan back, when you look at authoritarian rule and how they have to create crises and wars, sometimes to deflect from the poor leadership and poor economic standards, the one China policy has caught up to them. What an idiot thing. Like, I've always wondered about that. Now you see that they're starting to turn into Japan, where they're having a generational fall off. I think they have a really high unemployment rate right now, where the new generation coming out of schools can't get work. And they're all the faking of the GDP they did for 10 or 20 years, building, just stupid stuff everywhere, has finally, it appears, caught up to them. And they may suffer a grand depression. And usually the way authoritarians get out of that is, let's start a war. Look over there, that sort of thing. And of course, they need, like, the economy. They need to find ways to expand the economy, and going after the largest chip maker in the world, in Taiwan, would help corner a market. It would paralyze a lot of things too. And so I think we're trying to move away from it. So I think you're right. It's one of those things you definitely have to look at. And it doesn't seem like, things are improving with China at all.
Well, there's no shooting yet. So
Yeah.
maybe, as I said, cooler heads will prevail. I certainly hope so.
There you go. Sounds like my first 5 marriages. There's no shooting yet. So how can compliance become more engaging? Is this something that's fun that a lot of CEOs, a lot of boardrooms, a lot of people like to talk about? Or is it something like to deal with? I came from one of those backgrounds where ask first, or it's better to break the rules and then ask for permission later. But that's probably not good when the Justice Department is involved in the United States.
Well, as I tell people, as a teenage boy, I certainly had the view that I would take action now and ask for forgiveness later. As a father of a teenage daughter, my views evolved on that topic.
Yeah.
So I think you can have evolution of your thinking in that. But that's why I try to tell people that, properly seen, compliance will not save you money, but make you money. We've had a couple of academic studies have shown that more effective compliance allows you to not only do business more efficiently and better in high risk areas, but it also having the culture. And I'm going to pick up on a word you use. We didn't really discuss trust. If your employees trust you, if they trust management, they'll raise their hand and speak up, not to just say, oh, I saw a legal violation, do something about it. They'll raise their hand and say, I think we can do this better. I think we can have a more efficient process. I think we can have a better product. And they won't be laughed at, and they won't be fired, and they won't be retaliated against. And if you have that kind of trust, that's going to lead to the values we talked about in terms of your overall corporate culture. That's going to improve your compliance and allow you to do business more efficiently and more effectively.
There you go. So you've written a lot of books on compliance and find on Amazon. There's the Compliance Handbook. Anybody who wants to maybe familiarize themselves with some of your print works as an author, what books do you recommend? Because you've written a lot.
Well, I'm almost ashamed to admit it, but I will admit my 2 best-selling books are children's books on compliance.
Really?
Yes. Being a compliance officer is awesome, number 1. Number 2, speaking up is awesome. And the first book came out in December, right before Christmas 2022. Within a week, it became a bestseller on Amazon's children's books. Within a month, it was my number 1 best-selling book of all time. Go figure. So I would suggest, based on the popular sales, that my children's book series might be a good place to start, because it's designed to explain what a compliance officer does, and then why a culture of speak up about the values we talked about and employees having trust to raise their hand and speaking up are so important.
Definitely. And so if you see something, say something. Is that what you mean by speaking up?
Absolutely.
There you go. One thing you talk about in one of your books is anti-bribery leadership. Does this mean I can't grease the wheels by flipping $100 to my Vegas waiter when he gets me in the club or whatever?
Well, that's domestic U.S. Remember, my law that I've been talking about applies outside the United States.
Oh, yeah, they're okay. Note to self, I can still keep doing that.
Yes.
There you go. Well, you got to get in the club somehow, but it's probably not going to work in Ibiza because that might be trouble since it's in international waters. Last time I checked. So, I mean, I know that China has bribery issues. Some other countries do, or you've got to play games with their, your how you have the company registered and owned, and some companies. I don't know if China still does it. Does China still do a thing where you have to give part of the company over to them if you want to set up business in China?
Yes. You
You have
have
to.
to have a Chinese partner in a joint venture, and typically the Chinese partner has 50.1%,
Uh,
is
and
where
all.
many American Trump companies have gotten into trouble.
Yeah, and then I'm sure they have access to all your IP and all your secrets and trademarks and stuff. Lovely.
If you do business in China, they will steal your IP. You just have to
Yeah.
accept that. The times I've done business there, we've given them 2 or 3 generations old IP.
Hmm.
But it's been a long, 15 years since I've done those sorts of deals. But yes, they will take your IP.
Wow. Oh, they never change. Maybe they'll change someday in the future. Well, Tom, what haven't we touched on about what you do and why it's good for business in the compliance field?
Let me put in a plug for podcasting. If you have a business, start a podcast. There's no downside to starting a podcast. It will highlight you in several different areas. Number one, you'll be able to show that you're a true subject matter expert, whatever your field is. If it's plumbing, if it's bricklaying, if it's anti-corruption, if it's podcasting. If you have a podcast about podcasting, people are going to notice that. But more importantly, you can call or email any person. Say you want to make a sales call and I want to email you, Chris, about buying something. And I email you and I say, I have Tom Fox, I have widget 123. I'd like to talk to you about it. You may or
Hmm.
may not respond. If I email you and say, Chris, I want you to come on my podcast and talk about you, I get 100% acceptance rate. And so you can develop a personal relationship with your customers, with potential customers. And
Hmm.
the power of social media, hopefully you're going to take part of this podcast and create social media sharing assets. That's
Yeah.
exactly what I do.
Hmm.
I create tweets, 60-second videograms for Twitter,
Hmm.
and 2-minute videograms for LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube. So you get incredible social media marketing engagement through a videogram, which is simply a clip of us talking on a podcast. So you have a huge social media presence that most businesses, certainly small businesses, are not utilizing to the full extent they can. It's the most cost-effective way to do marketing.
Yeah, I know one guy who he has people on. He invites people on to come pitch their business on his podcast, and then after he goes, "How can I help you?" and tries to figure out a way to help people do the thing. And so it's a great handshake, and he does a lot of business over it. I mean, you're right; it really does work and
Eh,
stuff. So
Yeah, one thing, I hate to delve into psychology, but there's something about the audio format of podcast.
hmm,
People listen to you and they trust you more than if you wrote something for them or sent them an email or something, sent them some piece of marketing. And I can't really explain that. I just know more people come up to me as I recognize your voice. I recognize
wow.
your voice. So it's a huge benefit.
Hmm. It's probably because I did the audio narration of most of those OnlyFans Pornhub videos, and that's probably why people recognize my voice when they hear me. But that's another story for another time. Yeah, I mean, people come up to me, they run up to me, and they go, thechrisvossshow.com, and you're like, we need to hire an opera singer for that part. Well, Tom, this has been wonderful to have you on the show and very insightful. Learning how to do business better, especially when you do a business from an international aspect. Give us your final thoughts and pitch as we go out to the audience. How can they onboard with you? How can they do business with you, et cetera, et cetera?
So I have a 2 ways to get in touch with me on the compliancepodcastnetwork.net. I have SpeakPipe. You can leave me an audio voicemail. You can connect with me in that way. I'm available on LinkedIn. I have to shout out to Podmatch because that's how I met you. Um, Alex Sanfilippo has created a great tool for people who want to be guests or who want to have guests come on their show. So he's really found a niche that all of us have used. I would love if anyone wants to come on and talk about their business. I have a ton of podcasts. I'm always looking for content. So if you want to talk Star Wars, Star Trek, I don't care. I'd love to have you come on my show. And this has been a great way for me to be able to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. And give us your .com so people can find you on the interwebs, please.
Compliancepodcastnetwork.net.
There you go.
That's my .com.
Thank you very much for coming on, Tom. We've learned a lot today, and hopefully we may have encouraged a new generation of podcasters. To my audience, be sure to refer the show to your family, friends, and relatives. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, LinkedIn.com/Chris Voss, YouTube.com/Chris Voss, and Chris Voss 1 on the Tickety Talkity over there. There's 3 to 4 new shows every weekday, folks. 10 to 15 to 20 a week. I guess there'd be 20. They just keep growing out of hand. So make sure you listen to them all. There will be a test on Saturday. And if you don't pass it, we'll make you listen the whole week all over again.
I love it.
Some of you guys do that anyway. Thanks so much for tuning in. Be good to each other. Stay safe. And we'll see you guys next time.